Okay, so Morgan Harper, Democrat of Ohio, and Josh Mandel, Republican of Ohio, debated last night. I'm going to play the entire debate, and then I'm going to interject some of my personal thoughts and commentary along the way. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope that you get out and vote, that you help to register people to vote, so we can truly take back our country and our state. It's very important that we get out and vote and make sure that Democrats win, so we can continue to move forward in our progress. I hope that you guys enjoy this video. Please like and subscribe.
Testing. Okay, here we go. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much to everyone that's here in the building tonight, everyone that is tuning in on social media and online. I am your moderator, Cassie Young, and tonight is a debate between candidates for U.S. Senator from Ohio. I am a co-founder and the director of Matter News and our nonprofit, Gray Matter Media. We're a 3-year-old independent nonprofit news organization founded by millennial women and run by a diverse board. And rather than scratching the surface of a slew of topics, we actually take deep dives into specific issues affecting people here in Columbus with multimedia content. And we have a diverse set of contributors that make that content, and we cover specifically Columbus. We are streaming this event tonight on Matter's social media channels on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter, so please do spread the word. The stream recording will be available on those platforms as well on our profiles after tonight's debate. Now, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that tonight we are on Hopewell and Miami land, and I also want to thank my co-moderator, Dan Wolven, and the North Columbus Baptist Church for providing this venue tonight.
Thank you very much, Cassie. Welcome to the meeting here. My name is Dan Wolven. I'm the pastor here at North Columbus Baptist Church, and I've been in the pastoral ministry for 40 years, 20 years in Cleveland area and 20 years here in Columbus. About 6 years ago, we founded a ministry, Awake America, Ohio, and the design of that is to try to engage and inform our 430-some independent Baptist pastors and churches across Ohio, trying to engage them with their legislators and trying to get our legislators to understand some of our positions. I'm also a board member on Ohio Value Voters. We are live streaming to our website, awakeamericaohio.com, so it will remain on our website in the entirety for quite a while afterward. Well, I get the wonderful privilege of introducing our candidates here tonight. A consumer protection attorney, community organizer, and candidate from Columbus, running on the Democratic ticket to be the next United States Governor from Ohio. Please welcome Morgen Harper. A Marine, state representative, state treasurer of Ohio for 8 years, from the greater Cleveland area, running on the Republican ticket to be the next United States Senator from Ohio. Please welcome Josh Mandel.
Do you want us to put this on? Oh, well,
Yes.
Oh. Okay. So while our candidates get situated, we're going to give you just a little bit of an explanation of how tonight's going to work. We won't be taking any questions from our live audience here tonight, but 80 of you submitted questions online for this debate beforehand. I originally asked plan to ask most of my questions, as well as a couple of yours. But at Matter, we really value community engagement, and so we really want to be a platform for the people. And so tonight I'm going to be kind of passing my mic to the community members that took the time to submit thoughtful questions, and mainly asking questions that are on theme with a lot of the recurring things that we were getting questions about from the audience.
Both candidates have spent a lot of money, and their campaign teams have already invested hundreds, if not thousands, of hours to reach this point in their races. And since this is a debate, we know that the candidates have opposing views on some issues. From a moderator's point of view, applause is a time waster, and it upsets the flow of the questions. But many of these topics certainly affect you deeply, both as citizens and human beings. So while applause is not necessary or even preferred, we do insist that at least you wait for the candidate to finish their response if there are times you feel like you must applaud. Applause is still better than boom roasted, okay? So both candidates deserve the respect of being able to answer the questions without interruption from the audience or negative comments or outbursts when they finish. For tonight, let's all pretend that we're mature enough to control our emotions, seek to expand our minds, and try to leave this event having learned something helpful. For those of you at home, you may be as loud and as obnoxious as you care to be.
Wow. Wow. That is saying something. When a pastor says, let's pretend to be mature. Wow.
So,
the rules for the evening, we're going to be asking 20 questions, and each question will be directed to a specific candidate. They will have a minute and a half to answer that question, and the other candidate will have 1 minute to respond. And then, if so desired, each candidate can have 30 seconds again for rebuttal if they request it. So we are assuming they're not going to request it, but if they do request it, we'll have a 30-second response to that rebuttal is available. There are 2 questions per moderator out of the 20 that are going to be directed to both candidates. And in those questions, as we make that designation, each candidate will have the opportunity to answer for a minute and a half in those 2 questions that would be addressed to both candidates. So we're going to begin with a 2-minute opening. Before we began tonight, we had a coin toss, and so that directs the whole venue here this evening. For the opening, Josh Mandel will be opening and Morgen Harper will be closing. In the questions, Josh Mandel will be the first one to ask a question, and Morgen will be the second. And in the closing, Josh will go first, and Morgen will go last in the closing for the night.
So we're starting with Josh's statement, opening statement, 2 minutes.
Great. Thank you for hosting this, and thank you all for being here tonight and watching at home. As I travel the state of Ohio, I am asked quite often why I'm running for U.S. Senate, and I give 3 reasons. Gideon, who's my 5 years old, Judah, who's my 7-year-old, and Rosie, who's my 8-year-old. I believe the radical left and the secular left in this country are trying to teach our kids to hate America. I believe the radical left and the secular left in America are trying to erase American history. They're trying to teach our kids in schools that somehow America was founded to protect the principles of slavery and racism. That is false. In fact, in 1776, there were very brave men marching through the snow with blood on their feet to found this nation. And the principles they were trying to protect and advance were freedom and liberty. And right now, unfortunately, here in Ohio and throughout the country, because of the radical Biden administration, Pelosi, Schumer, and others, our freedom and our liberty are under attack. In this campaign for U.S. Senate, on the Republican side and on the Democrat side, there's only one candidate who has consistently been standing for human liberty. There's only one candidate who's consistently been standing for freedom of individuals, for the Trump America First agenda, and that's me. I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize the fact that
literally less than 2 minutes into his first statement, he's got to bring up Donald Trump. He's also got to insult the sitting president and his opponent. The comment he made about men marching in the snow in 1776 with blood on their feet for liberty for all is just factually untrue. It was liberty for rich white men
that Tim Ryan is a wimp and is afraid to debate Morgan. I am not. I'm not afraid to debate her. And I'll leave you with this. If Morgan was a white male, Tim Ryan would have already debated her. But the reality is that she's a black female. And the establishment of the Democratic Party, which Tim Ryan represents, they have trampled on black people and left the black community behind. And I believe Tim Ryan ignoring and disrespecting Morgan
We've hit
is a
time.
perfect example of that.
Thank you. And Morgan, now your statement.
Thank you. Well, thank you to our moderators and to Pastor Wolven for having us this evening, and thank you to all of you for attending. My name is Morgan Harper, and I'm running to represent you in the United States Senate because Ohio needs a new path forward, new leadership, not more of the same old politics. How I got to this point has a lot to do with my Ohio story. I was born here in Columbus, given up for adoption. I lived in a foster home as an infant and was adopted and raised by my mom, a public school teacher. And with the strength of our community and a solid union job, she was able to pour everything into my education and propel me to Princeton University and Stanford Law School. But while I was away, Ohio was changing, and the possibility of my story being every child's story is slipping away. When I got to Washington to take on the big banks that caused the financial and foreclosure crisis as a lawyer at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau during the Obama administration, I started to understand why. We have had a generation of leadership that has bought and sold away our futures to protect the special interests who fund them. We do not have a policy problem. We have a politician problem, and I want to change that. That is why I refuse to accept corporate PAC money. I want to be free to fight for a bold, pro-worker agenda that will make sure that everyone in Ohio is guaranteed access to opportunity, health care for everyone, and create thousands of clean energy jobs all over our state that are going to be high-paying jobs no matter where you live. I have always stood up for working people. I have always stood for reproductive rights and against special interests like the NRA that have funded Washington. My name is Morgan Harper. Ohio, it is our turn, and I look forward to discussing the issues this evening.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on to the first round of questions. Josh, this is about cryptocurrency. Both of you have spoken about cryptocurrency in your campaigns. What is your biggest concern and biggest hope for how blockchain technology could impact the lives of Ohioans? You have 1.5 minutes.
Listen, I think the last century was the century of big government and big banks. And I think this century is the century of Bitcoin and the democratization of money. Let me talk a little bit about why the democratization of money is so important. For anyone in this audience tonight, Columbus Baptist Church, for anyone who's watching at home, whether you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian, Vegetarian, whatever you are, if you distrust government, if you are skeptical of why government does things, if you are skeptical of the politicians, if you are skeptical of the bureaucrats in the bowels of the bureaucracy, you should be for Bitcoin. You should be for the democratization of money. I came to this issue because I believe in advancing the cause of individual liberty, because I believe in personal freedom. And the reality is, I believe it is time to end the Federal Reserve. I think it's time to decentralize money. When government is big, we as individuals are small. But when we can make government limited in size and scope, we can make individuals big. And that is what Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and the democratization of money is all about. Making government limited in size and scope and power, and making we as individuals big and having control of our lives.
Thank you. Morgan, you have 1 minute to respond.
So what I find interesting about blockchain technology really has to do with what I'm hearing from people in Ohio, something that I actually didn't hear my opponent reference at all. But what I'm hearing from people in Ohio is a real interest in the fact that through investments in the space with cryptocurrency, I'm, for example, talking to a man who's saying it's the first time he's been able to pay his mortgage 2 months in a row. Small business owners that are able to apply the technology to how they're running their companies. So that's what I think is hopeful and has some potential. But as a former consumer protection attorney and one who is very familiar with how scams can take over different markets, we also need to be recognizing and aware of what the risks are and mitigating against them. And I would also add that another area that I am concerned about and that I'm getting more information about is the environmental impacts of blockchain technology. We need to make sure that if there is an opportunity here, we are not further exacerbating the climate crisis that already is presenting an existential threat to the future of Ohio's children.
Thank you very much. Morgan, you have the next question directed for you. 1.5 minutes in response. In regard specifically to the filibuster in the U.S. Senate, is there any standard procedure that you believe should be left inviolate? Or should each Congress get the opportunity to start all over from scratch with all of the rules?
So the filibuster is clearly a very big topic right now because here's where we're at. We have the Senate, an institution of our government, one of the core branches of our government, making up part of Congress, that is not able to pass legislation. And that is because we have a radical Republican Party that has no interest in serving the needs of the American people, including the people of Ohio, and we have to stop it. And so the filibuster is a barrier, a procedural barrier to being able to pass legislation. We need to get rid of it. It's a relic. It is a Jim Crow relic. And in fact, for most of our history, we had the ability for the Senate to pass legislation through a simple majority. That is what the American people are looking for. That is why I support getting rid of the filibuster.
Yes. Awesome.
But let's be clear. If we had a Republican Party that had any interest in accomplishing anything, then we wouldn't even be having this conversation. They are out of control. They do not care about serving us. And I am running for the United States Senate to make sure that we have a representative, unlike my opponent, who is going to be for the people and about delivering real value and solutions to Ohio.
Thank you very much. Josh, you have 1 minute to respond.
Well, I think we need to do everything we can to maintain the filibuster. With due respect, I believe the only party that's out of control and reckless is the party that's led by Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer. I was at a Waffle House the other day in Octa, Ohio, between Columbus and Cincinnati, and I talked to a waitress, and she's working hard all day, and then she tells me she goes to the grocery store. She can't afford to pay for groceries. She goes to the gas station, can't afford to pay for gas because of the Biden inflation. And if you look at the reckless policies and reckless legislation that's been advanced,
either gas prices or inflation prices, that is an absolute lie from Republicans. An absolute lie from Republicans.
in Washington, we need to do everything we can to stop it and block it. And I believe the filibuster is an important component to stopping and really hitting the emergency brake on these Biden, Pelosi, Schumer policies that are destroying lives for waiters and waitresses and nurses and truck drivers and laborers all throughout the state of Ohio.
Thank you very much.
Just a quick point of clarification on my questions are actually mostly going to be the opposite of what you're doing and are mostly for both candidates. So for most of my questions, both of you will have a minute and a half.
But I get a chance to rebut on this?
If you want to. Yeah, okay. So
Would,
we'll give you 30 seconds.
Yeah, so here's what I'm hearing from Ohioans. The Ohioans I talk to, yes, are concerned about the cost of living and that it's not keeping up with wages. But let's be very clear about what's happening here. That we have had a generation of economic policy that has prioritized the needs of large multinational corporations, like the type that fund the super PACs that are supporting my opponent's campaign, okay? And we need to stop it. And what is the first step to get that done? It is electing a United States Senator that is not bought and sold by these very same large multinational corporations. My opponent is a career politician. Nothing will change with him.
Thank you.
Okay. So most of these next questions will be a minute and a half for each person versus the rebuttal. Josh will go first, even though this is for both candidates. Many question submitters asked about worsening inequality amongst Ohioans and the economic effects the pandemic has had on the middle and low-income people. Tyler, an OSU student and part-time Starbucks employee, asked both candidates, how do you plan to advocate for more equitable economic development, both racially and geographically, across the state of Ohio?
If I understand the question, it's on the heels of the pandemic and how people are impacted by the pandemic. I was talking to someone the other day. I was in Summit County in Akron and heard this story about a nurse. She's a pediatric nurse known as one of the best pediatric nurses at Akron Children's Hospital. Her job is to take care of kids. Tragically, she had 2 miscarriages. She's now pregnant for a 3rd time. Her physician said, do not have the vaccine. She goes to Akron Children's, says, listen, I can't have the vaccine. I lost 2 pregnancies. I'm pregnant, thank God, for a 3rd time, and my physician's telling me, so I need an exemption. They said, listen, either you have the vaccine or you're fired. She said, no, you don't understand. There's a baby I'm trying to protect. You're a children's hospital. I can't have the vaccine. Our whole job here is to take care of kids. They said, we understand. Either you have the vaccine or you're fired. The most important thing we can do within this pandemic to protect people's jobs is to give people the freedom of whether or not they want to put a vaccine in their body. And if they do want to do that, by all means, it's their freedom to do that. If they do not, it's their freedom as well. Disproportionate to men, women who are nurses throughout this state and throughout this country, who a year ago, at the height of the pandemic, were told, come to work without a vaccine at the height of the pandemic. Now it's down here, and they're being told, if you don't have a vaccine, you're going to be fired. This is wrong. The most important thing we can do to protect people's jobs is give them the freedom to decide whether or not they have a vaccine.
Okay, we're at time. A minute and a half for Morgan.
That was not answering the question
I think my
at all.
opponent might have misunderstood the question. The question was about economic inequality, which is one of the biggest issues that we are facing as a state and a country. People don't have enough money. So what am I going to do about it? First, we need to be investing in the renewable energy sector and creating as many and thousands of jobs that are possible to create in our state in a job of the future that is going to be high wage earning for people all over the state, no matter where they live. 2, we're going to make sure that they have debt-free training to work those jobs. And 3, we are going to make sure that they have health care no matter who their employer is. That is why I support universal health care, Medicare for all. And I commit to not taking any corporate PAC money, so I will be free to actually fight for that agenda. But while we're on the topic of the pandemic, which my opponent interjected into a question that was really about economics and making sure people have enough money, let's talk about what we've both been doing to serve our communities and keep them really free and safe and healthy during this pandemic. While my opponent is burning masks for little jokes on Twitter, I've been working with people throughout Columbus and Franklin County to get thousands of masks to people, including homeless shelters, at the peak in spring of 2020 to make sure that we were protecting each other. We started a rideshare program to get people to their vaccines, which we know do save lives. We got people to the polls to vote who are immunocompromised, elderly people, immigrants who are blind and have no access to transportation. That's what service looks like. That's the type of leadership that Ohio deserves in the United States Senate.
Okay. Thank you both. This question is for both candidates again, but this time Morgan will go first. Allie, an 18-year-old Yale student from Solon, asked both candidates, as a young person, I will have to live through the constantly worsening climate crisis. One characteristic of the crisis is that it becomes exponentially less remediable as time goes on, and as time passes, more drastic policies are required to solve it. How do you plan to meet this urgency through policy?
Well, thank you for the question. And this is one of the biggest issues of our time, as I've already referenced. And so the first thing that we need to do is make sure that we are electing officials that are really focused on solving the problem, addressing the crisis, and not taking money from the very companies that have been trying to mislead us for the past 40 years about what's coming. And I am such a person, and that is why I've committed to not take any money from corporate PACs, including from the fossil fuel industry. And then what do? We recognize that this actually presents a huge economic opportunity for us as a state. We create the incentives and investments at the federal level to create jobs in the clean energy sector that you can work even with a high school diploma. We create those debt-free training opportunities so people all over our state, young people, will be able to work those jobs. And the third thing we do is make sure that my opponent gets nowhere near the United States Senate, because he has on the record said that he is a proud soldier for the fossil fuel industry, that he will continue to have people who are related to his campaign that are connected to the First Energy scandal, one of the biggest bribery scandals in the history of the state of Ohio, and we cannot have him be anywhere near representing us.
Ladies and gents,
Yes, amen.
Morgan is running for U.S. Senate in Ohio, not in California. And the policies you just heard are policies that are literally sinking the state of California and sinking left-wing states throughout the United States of America.
That is not true at all.
We are blessed in the state of Ohio to have an abundance of natural gas. People don't realize this, but if you took the state of Ohio, the state of Pennsylvania, and the state of West Virginia, and you combined our three states into a region, that region would be the third largest producer of natural gas in the entire world. Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia. These are assets, not liabilities. We should be drilling for all the natural gas and oil we can in Ohio and America for three reasons. One, there are hundreds of thousands of jobs buried in the ground. Morgan Harper, Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, they want to keep those jobs buried in the ground. That's not fair to the people of Ohio. It's not fair to the people in our country. We've got to bring those jobs out of the ground. Two,
Absolute lie.
let's bring down the cost of heating homes. Think about how cold it is. If you're a family on a fixed income or senior citizens right now in Columbus, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Dayton, you're having trouble paying your power bill, your heating bill, we can bring those costs down with American domestic energy. Third, let's keep America safe. Instead of depending on radical Islamic regimes in the Middle East, instead of empowering Putin, what if we, as the United States of America, we powered our country and our state with American energy, created American jobs, and we created security and safety for
The fossil
our
fuel
people?
industry is
That
dead.
is my energy vision for America.
We need renewable energy. That is where we are. We need renewable energies.
I would encourage my opponent to also visit places like Toledo, where we are producing solar panels, and those are creating some of the highest paying jobs out there. So I don't know that you've made a full visit or tour of the state, but that might be something to add to the campaign schedule. Because what we need to do is both protect people in the existing jobs that they have, but also be honest about what the future is looking like. And that's what Allie's question was about. We know that we have risk. We have an opportunity to create an amazing economic moment for Ohio, and we cannot squander it with leadership who is living in denial about what's happening.
Next question, y'all. And just a reminder, if you can, try to keep the applause limited. That helps us with the flow of the event. Thanks, y'all.
Okay, on a both question, you don't have a rebuttal. So that should have been stopped. Josh, you have this question directed to you, and this is for both candidates. So you both have 1.5 minutes to respond with no rebuttal. It appears that both candidates tonight operate outside the establishment, or at least the status quo here in Ohio. Morgan, and you run for Congress, it could definitely be said you're running against an establishment Democrat.
Mandel is part of the
and Josh, you seem to be a pariah to the establishment here in the ORP. How has that prepared you for this race? And what are some of the obstacles you believe that you will need to overcome? You have 1.5 minutes.
Listen, one of the reasons I was interested in doing this debate tonight is because the establishment in the Democrat Party has been so disrespectful and frankly has just condescended on Morgan. And I mentioned earlier, I'm going to mention it again. If Morgan was a white male, Tim Ryan would have already debated her. But the reality is, because she's a black female, Tim Ryan and his buddies in the Democrat establishment, they condescend on her, they take her for granted. It's the same thing the establishment in the Democratic Party has done to the black community for decades and generations. It's why in my campaign for U.S. Senate, once I'm the nominee, I'm going to set records in the state of Ohio for earning votes in the black community. And I'm going to take a message to the black community about why moms and dads should have a choice where their kids go to school. I'm going to take a message to the black community about why freedom and liberty and parental control of our kids is the right way, not government control of our kids. And listen, I wear as a badge of honor that the establishment in the Republican Party hates me. I took on Kasich on Medicaid expansion. I took on Kasich on Common Core. I took on Kasich on transparency in government. And the same exact people in Ohio who are trying to stop Trump here are trying to stop me. I bask in it, and I wear it as a badge of honor.
Right. Mentioning Trump yet again.
Thank you, Josh.
Pathetic.
Morgan, you have 1.5 minutes.
Yeah. So what we don't need to have happen is Josh Mandel speaking in any way for the black community. I think we've got that. And I think what the black community of Ohio knows very clearly is that the radical Republican Party that's trying to strip away our voting rights does not have our best interests at mind. The radical Republican Party that you are proud that you fought Medicaid expansion, that makes sure that people are able to access addiction recovery services and get their lives back on track, it is an abomination. And so what we need to stay focused on, and what I am entirely focused on, is not about taking on establishment this and that. It's about the people of Ohio. It's about making sure that we are a state of the future. It's about making sure that if you're born here, just like I got the opportunity to, that you get to live out your potential. And what's it going to take to get there? We need to be creating jobs all over this state, as I've said, in the clean energy sector. We need to make sure that if you live here and you have housing, that it is high quality housing so that you can show up and get to work and be a good worker. And we need to make sure that everyone in our state has access to health care, regardless of who their employer is, so that you can also be prepared to show up, contribute to the economy, and keep our community strong. That is the type of leadership that Ohioans are desperate for, and it is very clear that my opponent, who is a 20-year career politician, plans to very much continue the status quo.
Exactly. I completely agree with Morgan.
Thank you very much. Next question is directed to Morgan. This is for Morgan from Jim, who lives in Ashtabula. So you'll have 1.5 minutes to answer, and Josh will have a 1-minute follow-up. On your website, you take a position against continuous wars, which is commendable. You're also an advocate for women's rights and equality. Does your vision of women's rights extend to a female draft in the military, as was included in the House and Senate versions of the 2021 National Defense Authorization Act? Will you vote for or against forcing our daughters to fight in wars?
Well, I actually support that people who want to enter the military are free to do that and make that decision for themselves. And I think that, we actually have a lot of ways that people are able to serve the country. One option is being in the military, but other option are things that existing programs. AmeriCorps, another great way to just serve our community. Civilian Climate Corps, that's been discussed through some of the legislation that's moving through Congress right now. So there, I do think we should be able to enable people to make decisions for themselves. But I will clarify and state again, as I have on my website, that I am very interested in putting a stop to the military-industrial complex that has propped up defense contractors, allowed them to get rich, while we have seen young people from all over our state pass away in wars that had no clear strategy and were never going to be able to deliver results that made such loss worth it. That I will never support. I am on the side of young people being able to stay safe and healthy and contribute to our state and help continue to make it great.
Thank you.
For someone
Josh,
who's...
one moment, we'll get the timer set. You have 1 minute.
Yeah. For someone who is not a politician, I don't think we heard an answer from you. So are you for or against our daughters having been in the draft?
I am for people being able to make their own decisions, which is a sentiment I think you also share.
Do you want to answer the question? Are you for or against our daughters being in the draft?
I've already answered that question.
You have not. You indeed have not. I am against our daughters being mandated into a draft. I'm a Marine Corps vet. I did a couple tours in Iraq. I served with both men and women who were terrific Marines. I have a daughter, as I mentioned earlier, who's 8 years old, and I do have the courage to answer every question that's asked up here, and I think it would be wrong to force our daughters into a draft.
Thank you.
If there's no rebuttal, we'll go to our next question.
I would welcome a 30-second rebuttal from Morgan to actually answer the question.
That's her choice. So we'll go on to the next
Oh, here is actually where he's supportive of choices, so that's good.
All right. Our next question is for Josh to answer specifically, so you'll have a minute and a half. This is Isaac, a social worker from Columbus, asking Josh, how do we make housing affordable and home ownership possible for the youngest generation of people?
Anyone who has the financial capacity to buy a home, I think, should have the freedom to do that. But I think something we saw in the housing crisis 10 years ago is one of the reasons it turned into a crisis was because government was subsidizing housing to such a high degree, and you had a lot of people who were in home ownership who at the end of the day couldn't afford to. And who ended up really screwing them over? It was Democrats and Republicans in Washington who were trying to force government money upon them to buy homes. And the reality is, in America, with over 300 million people living here, some people, it's right to be a homeowner, and other people, it might be right to live in an apartment. And that is an individual choice. But I can tell you something I'm very strongly against, which is government, Democrat and Republican politicians, forcing, through a bunch of government money, homes on people who can't afford it. And at the end of the day, they find themselves in bankruptcy or even in worse situations like suicide and broken marriages and whatnot. And so at the end of the day, it's a personal choice for someone whether or not they want to buy a home, but it's not the government role to subsidize it to the point where people can't pay for home ownership at the end of the day. And I want to reiterate, it was Dodd-Frank and Barney, it was Barney Frank and all these guys through a bunch of different bills who subsidized this stuff. And at the end of the day, I believe they weren't just bad politicians, but they were criminals. Because if you look at all the money they stuffed in their pockets,
we're at time. We need to move on to Morgan's answer, which she'll have a minute to give.
So back to the question, which was about how we create housing opportunities, especially for younger people living in our communities. And this is something that I've heard a lot as I've traveled around the state, met with people throughout Ohio. The cost of housing is increasing, and it is becoming increasingly impossible for people to access the level of housing that they would want based on how much money they're earning. So we need to be focused on this and have a real strategy and a plan. And here's what I would do. First, we need to be increasing investment in increasing the supply of housing. We do not have enough housing, especially in the rental markets that we see, to enable all of our young people to be able to pay and afford housing while they're working and working in jobs in our cities, especially. We also need to be doing what we can to make sure that the housing that's available, this is something I was talking to someone about recently in northwestern Ohio, that the housing is there, but it's a very poor quality housing because we don't have enough enforcement of what the housing quality should be. There's a role to play. We have the resources to do that.
Time.
Very straightforward. And I will just say,
we have to move on.
Just as usual,
we
no
have
vision,
to move on.
no strategy,
We've hit time.
typical
We
career
have to
politician.
respect the rules. I'm so sorry. If there's no rebuttal, we'll move on to the next question.
I'll take 30 seconds to rebut.
Go ahead.
At the end of the day, it is not the role of government to subsidize housing. It is the role of individuals to choose whether or not they have the capacity to buy a home or rent an apartment. I am proud to be endorsed by organizations like the Club for Growth and the Senate Conservatives Fund, who stand up for individual liberty and fiscal conservatism. And the principles that I'm espousing here: get government out of the way and let individuals make decisions.
Thank you. Okay, we have our next question. This is a question for both of you, but Morgan will answer first, 1.5 minutes each. In recent years, the issue of qualified immunity, especially for police officers, has been a hot topic. Multiple pieces of federal legislation have been introduced to reform it in a way that holds police officers accountable for violating a person's constitutional rights. Donald Wiggins of Columbus asked both candidates, if elected to represent Ohio in the United States Senate, will you work to end qualified immunity?
So this is an issue that I have talked to a lot of people about throughout Ohio. And, and especially even in conversations with law enforcement officers and former law enforcement officers, and some of whom actually are present this evening in the crowd who I've spoken to, there is an acknowledgement that we have incidents of bad actors who are supposed to be protecting safety, but actually are not doing that. And there results in, at times, a loss of life. And when those incidents occurs, there needs to be accountability. Just like when all of us break the law, that type of accountability exists. So I do support ending qualified immunity. And before I turn over my time, I do just want to add one thing, because my opponent did mention Club for Growth, which we need to add a little bit of color to that so that everyone understands what exactly he's referencing there. That is a super PAC. Super PACs are dark money that fund campaigns, and the only stated mission of that organization is to lower taxes for the large multinational corporations that have gutted the manufacturing sector of Ohio, and to keep taxes low for people who are already extremely wealthy. He does not care about us. He does not care about our communities. He is not on our side, and we need to make sure that we do not get him anywhere near the United States Senate.
Okay, Josh, you're going to have 1.5 minutes.
I am extremely proud to have the endorsement of the Club for Growth. The Club for Growth stands for individual freedom, for human liberty, for fiscal conservatism, and for everything the Constitution stands for. The framers of the Constitution had a vision for this country that holds true today in 2022, just as it did in the 1700s. And I am very proud to have the endorsement and support of the Club for Growth. Of course, we should not get rid of qualified immunity. Police officers are the good guys. Morgan, the Democrat Party, they think police officers are the bad guys. I did a roundtable recently with a group of cops here in Columbus, and we talked about the fact that they're afraid to do their jobs because they keep getting attacked by radical liberals like Morgan, like Andy Ginther, who's the mayor of Columbus here, and so many leftists throughout this state and this country. And listen, at the end of the day, we got to give the benefit of the doubt to cops. If you look at the thugs from Black Lives Matter, you look at the thugs from Antifa, these are thugs. They bashed the State House, they bashed apartment buildings in downtown Columbus. They should be arrested and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And I will protect and defend police officers who are executing those arrests.
Thank you both.
Let me encourage the crowd to try to be able to control yourself and allow the candidates to speak. Thank you very much. Okay, Josh, this question is for you. You have 1.5 minutes. And Morgan, you'll have a 1-minute rebuttal. You're often criticized for taking your campaign directly to churches, and a comment you made concerning church and state has raised some eyebrows in the past. Did our founding fathers ever intend for government to be sterilized from every religious belief?
I do not believe in separation of church and state. There is no such thing. The founders of this country, the founding fathers, they did not believe in separation of church and state. When you read the United States Constitution, nowhere in the United States Constitution do you read about separation of church and state. It does not exist. When I started this campaign, I made a decision. And the decision I made was, rather than running my campaign through traditional Republican Party groups, I was going to run my campaign through churches. The reason is, we're not going to save this country in political offices. We're not going to save this country in big corporate office towers. We're going to save this country in churches, in barns, and at kitchen tables throughout this state and throughout this country. The Judeo-Christian bedrock of America is the foundation of this country. America was founded on Judeo-Christian values, not on Muslim values, not on atheism, but on Judeo-Christian values. There's so many factors that separate that Judeo-Christian belief set from these other belief sets like Islam and atheism. And one of the main differentiating factors is our belief in good over evil and our willingness to fight for good over evil.
Thank you. We'll reset the timer, and Morgan, you have 1 minute.
I don't even really know where to begin, but let's be clear. A core American value is separation of church and state. And that does not mean that we don't respect the freedom and ability for each of us to worship in the way that we choose. But it does mean that we don't have government leaders that are trying to interfere with that right. And so what I believe that we all need to be focused on is, again, making sure we have leaders that are bringing us together, that are trying to stay focused on solving our problems. And what are the problems that I'm hearing from Ohioans? People are desperately concerned about the future, but not because of some inability to worship in the way they choose. They are scared of the future that is run by people like my opponent, because they sow discontent to be able to score political points and to get ahead for themselves and for the special interests who run and fund their campaigns. That's the truth. This isn't a real issue. He only cares about himself, and we
Thank you very
have to
much.
stop him.
I'll take a 30-second rebuttal on that.
Okay.
The left in this country is a godless left. It's a secular left, and they have a race to secularism in this country. They're trying to take faith in God out of all aspects of our society, and personally, I think we should be going in the opposite direction. Rather than watering down on our Judeo-Christian values, we should be doubling down on our Judeo-Christian values, instilling faith in the classroom, in the water cooler, and everywhere in society.
30 seconds up. Thank you very much. Morgan, you have 1.5 minutes for this response, and Josh, you'll have 1 minute in rebuttal. According to the U.S. Department of Energy, 2018 was the first year that the United States outproduced both Russia and Saudi Arabia in petroleum products. Do you consider that a cause for celebration or consternation, and why?
Well, first, I do want to come back to the prior question a little bit, just to clarify that, I believe that faith is really important. And I was raised in the Catholic tradition, and those values that I experienced as part of my upbringing have been the bedrock of my entire existence. And what do those values say? They say service, they say honesty. And so getting to this question, we need to stay focused on the fact that we have to have as much energy as possible to fuel the needs of our country. And some of those existing sources of energy, like the fossil fuel industry, have a role to play currently, but we need to be moving very aggressively to reduce our carbon emissions and increase our investments in the renewable energy sector. So that's what I'm focused on, and that is not only going to be something that will maintain our ability to live in this state, on this planet, be healthy, but it also is going to be a huge economic boon to our entire economy here in Ohio and create a lot of very high-paying jobs to get back to the place where we were when we were a state that was creating more high-paying jobs than anywhere else, a hotbed of innovation. We got away from that because of career politicians who became more about their special interests than us, and it needs to stop now so that we can have a state of the future that is very much invested in renewable energy.
Morgan, I'm having trouble keeping up with all your
Wait a moment. We're going to reset the timer.
Sure.
Okay, you have 1 minute. Thank you.
Morgan, I'm having trouble keeping up with all your hypocrisy because out of one side of your mouth, you say that you're against corporate welfare, but on the other side of your mouth, you say you're for renewable energy. The reality is the only way renewable energy can stand up in our economy is through corporate welfare. It's why I'm so strongly against it. If there's some wind or solar company that can stand up in a free market, by all means, but stop advocating for government welfare and corporate welfare to fund these companies. The reality is, in Ohio, we have an abundance of natural gas, of coal, and some oil, and in this country, we've got incredible resources, natural gas and oil. We should be drilling for all the oil and gas we can for the economic strength of America, jobs for our people, and national security for our nation. It is a win, win, win. The people of Ohio think folks like you and people, really, you sound like a loony Nancy Pelosi from California.
That is another lie
advocating for all this green
right.
energy.
Wow.
We want affordable energy in this country, oil, gas, and coal.
Let's also keep it respectful, please. Okay. No, if there's no rebuttal, then we'll go on to the next question. All right. So this question is for both of you, so you'll each have a minute and a half. Josh will answer first. Quinn, a barista from Columbus, asked both candidates, many states across the country have been introducing or passing legislation that would restrict the rights of transgender people to change our legal gender markers, access gender-affirming health care, and even change our names. Do you support or oppose this legislation, and if elected, what would you do to protect the rights of transgender Americans?
The transgender movement in this country is all about trampling the rights of men and women of faith. And it's also about trampling the rights of women. My daughter's 8 years old. Rosie does Taekwondo. If she, for the next 8 years, decides to dedicate herself to Taekwondo and decides to get up at 5 in the morning and train before school and then train after school and follow a special diet and a special exercise regimen for the next 8 years of her life, and then when she's 16 years old, she's competing at the top of her game nationally, and all of a sudden some guy named Brian, who was Brian on Monday, who's 6'4", 220, and on Tuesday he decides his name is Bonnie, he can come and compete against my daughter Rosie? That's ridiculous. It's
Wow.
antithetical to everything we
How
stand for. It's not
rude
fair for our
and
daughters.
nasty.
It's not fair for women all over this country. Not to mention having teenage boys in girls' locker rooms.
Oh, my God.
That's unsafe and insane. Look what happened in Loudoun County. Not to mention what happened at University of Pennsylvania. You had these women swimmers. They dedicated their life to swimming. And all of a sudden some guys, biological males, wake up one day and say, I'm going to compete in women's swimming? This is insane. There might be a teeny tiny percentage of the population that thinks it's okay and they all talk to each other. But the reality is 99.9% of the population thinks this transgenderism in the schools and everything and telling kids they can pick their gender, it is insane. I'm so strongly against it.
Wow, how very nasty.
For my
How
opponent to
homophobic
claim to
and
care so much
transphobic.
about freedom and then try to restrict people's abilities to be who they are, it's pretty inconsistent and, in fact, quite disingenuous. And here's what I think that we should do. We should focus on letting people be who they are. We should focus on protecting the right for people to be who they are. That's why I'm a strong supporter of the Equality Act, and I would push to get that passed in the United States Senate. And let's be really, really clear. The only reason why my opponent is spewing all of this nonsense is because he needs to do it to score political points, to be able to win the Republican nomination for this United States Senate seat. They try to divide us to prevent us from focusing on the things that really matter to most Ohioans.
Yes.
And what are those things?
Absolutely correct.
Most Ohioans I talk to across the state throughout this campaign are really concerned about making sure that their wages are keeping up with the cost of living. Most of the Ohioans I talk to are devastated by the role that the opioid and fentanyl epidemic has had on our state. Like the grandmother that I met who now is raising her 3 grandchildren because her daughter-in-law dropped dead in front of her from an overdose. And she can't keep up with the cost of those child care for 3 children because she only makes $16 an hour. That's what Ohioans are focused on. That's what we need to be coming together to work on, not spending time like my opponent worrying about the locker rooms and the bathrooms and behavior of children and people in school. Let's get to work for Ohio.
Thank you both. Our next question is specifically for Morgan, so you'll go first and have a minute and a half, and then we'll have a minute rebuttal. Alex, a single mom in North Columbus, asks Morgan, do you believe that ICE should be abolished? Why or why not?
I believe that we need to make sure we are preserving the ability for all of us to have the immigrant story like my mother was able to have. My mom came to the United States in the 1960s from Trinidad, and she was able to work, taking care of a family, cleaning their house, make her way through college, and then get to the position of adopting me and my brother and enabling us to be strong members of our community. That's what we all care about as Ohioans, I believe, and as Americans. And what is it going to take to make it possible for those types of stories to continue to happen? We need to ensure that we have comprehensive immigration reform and create pathways to citizenship. We can't spend time trying to make it impossible for people to come or build walls that are very clear that, as we see on YouTube, people are just walking through them. We need to stay focused on the reality. The reality is that America is a country that is made of immigrants, and that is the opportunity that we need to be preserving.
Okay, 1 minute for Josh.
Of course, we shouldn't get rid of ICE. We should be doing everything we can to finish President Trump's border wall. And listen, as long as we have 40,000 veterans,
how much longer is he
brothers of mine from the Marine Corps,
this
Army,
is just ridiculous.
Navy, and Air Force, who are living under bridges and living on the streets, we should not be spending 1 penny on housing or anything for these illegal aliens.
But you didn't even
Let me ask you a question.
Housing for
Let me ask you a question.
Americans.
15,000 Haitians somehow ended up at the Texas border. Last time I checked, there was an enormous body of water between Haiti and Texas. That doesn't happen by accident. This is an invasion, ladies and gentlemen. It is an invasion of our country.
Wow, more
and
nasty right-wing
when the history is told, we're going to see that it was funded by Soros, orchestrated by Obama and the Obama Alumni Association, and enabled by Joe Biden.
Wow, what a cuck. What
Would you like a 30-second rebuttal?
Yeah, go on YouTube. It's very clear. This wall is a joke. He needs to get the endorsement from Donald Trump to be able to make it through the Republican primary.
That's right.
So he will do whatever is necessary as a mini-Trump to continue to spread lies.
Exactly.
The videos are there. People are going through the wall. It's a complete waste of taxpayer money. It is not a real solution. It's just a slogan, and it's about what we would expect from a 20-year career politician who has nothing to show for it.
Exactly. Very good, Morgan.
All right, the next round of questions. This is to Josh. You have a minute and a half to answer. And Morgan, you have 1 minute for rebuttal. In breaking news today, the New York Post released a footage of clandestine operations involving our military, Homeland Security, and their involvement transporting illegal migrants from the southern border to various locations around the country. Is this an acceptable practice, and why?
It's absolutely an unacceptable practice.
The New York Post is a rag. No one believes any of that.
Because as these illegals are coming across the border, in towns like Columbus, Ohio, and Toledo, Ohio, and Cincinnati, Ohio, and Cleveland, Ohio, more than anyone, they're competing with blacks and Hispanics for jobs. And that's the dirty little secret that the Democrat Party won't tell you. It's a dirty little secret that Morgan won't tell you. It's a dirty little secret that Black Lives Matter and Antifa and all these lunatic groups won't tell you, is that every time an illegal alien seeps into this country, It's making it more difficult for Americans to get jobs, especially black and Hispanic Americans. Listen, I am a hardliner when it comes to immigration. We are a nation born in the rule of law. We have to follow the rule of law, which means sending back to Mexico and Honduras and Guatemala,
Trump, right?
wherever they came from, every single illegal alien
insurrectionist who's
who
white,
seeks into this.
right, Josh?
This is a zero-tolerance policy. If you go and watch these videos that Pastor Wolven is referencing, it is outrageous. They're using our tax money to bring in illegals and drop them in places like Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, to compete with our families and our neighbors and our kids with jobs. It needs to stop today.
Thank you. Let's reset the timer.
And I get a...
You have 1 minute.
Yeah. I mean, again, the real waste of taxpayer money is a wall that was a pet ego project by Donald Trump. And you are just going to continue his legacy. And also, let's be clear. My opponent is someone who feels very comfortable calling immigrants like my mother alligators. He said that. He is disrespectful. He does not reflect the values of our country. And what are those values? I agree. Those values are freedom. The freedom to be able to create pathways to citizenship so that we have immigrants who are coming and contributing to our communities. It is a bedrock principle of what America is about, and you have no idea what you're talking about.
Thank you. All right, the next question is to Morgan. You have 1.5 minutes to answer, and Josh will have 1 minute for rebuttal. Recently across Ohio, parents and school boards have been at odds over various issues: health, in-person or remote learning, attendance, curriculum, standardized testing, vaccines, school policies, or the promotion of values which are opposite of the parents. We've seen this in Parma, Upper Arlington, Rocky River, Hudson, Tip City, Olentangy, Bay Village, and multiple other districts. At what point do the parents forfeit their rights as being parents to the educational system?
Well, I think we all can agree. I mean, the educational experience starts and continues very much in the home, and there's a very big role, and parents are the drivers of that. And we also need to make sure that in our school systems we are incorporating the views of parents, educators, community members to make sure that we are getting our kids in a position to receive a quality education. That's what's going to allow us to have a workforce of the future. That's what is going to allow us to make sure that we have young people that are ready to contribute to our communities. What will not do that is by continuing to defund our school systems, to not address the fact that they are not funded equitably, and that we have someone, my opponent right here, who has done nothing to advance that issue. So instead, what you will hear from him, I'm sure, in a second when it's his turn to talk, is more of the right-wing talking points that aren't really about solving problems, that aren't about making sure that our kids are able to show up, get educated, learn, and have a great educational experience. It's about propping up himself to score those political points and do what he can to make sure that he earns the endorsement of Donald Trump. We can't allow it to happen.
All right, let's reset the timer. 1 minute for a rebuttal.
The real problem with the government schools today is that the administrators and the teachers, they care more about adults than kids. Of course, parents should be in control. It should be up to a mom or dad whether their kid wears a mask. It should be up to a mom or dad whether their kid has a vaccine. It should be up to a mom or dad what's being taught in the schools. That's why it's so outrageous that our tax money is being used to tell 8-year-olds that there's over 50 genders and you can just pick your gender. That is a lie. There's only 2 genders. Boys are boys and girls are girls. I recently came out calling on defunding all of the COVID relief that came to the government schools if the government schools are going to shut down. If they can't stay open with the COVID relief money they received, then they shouldn't receive that COVID relief money. It's time for the government schools to do what's right for kids.
Thank you very much.
Stop doing what's right for adults.
No response on the issue that I identified, which is that we have found our schools to be funded in an unconstitutional way by our Ohio Supreme Court. You have had the opportunity through your 20-year career in politics to do something about that, and you have done nothing, and you have no answers. So what we need to be focused on as Ohioans is coming together to figure out how every kid, no matter where they are in the state, is going to receive a quality education. We have parents involved in that, discussion. We have children involved. We have administrators involved. But what we can't do is continue the status quo.
Okay. Our next question is for both candidates. We'll ask Josh to answer first. You'll each have a minute and a half. We had quite a few questions submitted about voting rights and elections. For both candidates, will you support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act / Freedom to Vote Act? And if not, what recommendations do you have to ensure safe and equitable elections?
Which legislation?
They're asking specifically about the John Lewis Voting Rights Act or Freedom to Vote Act, and what recommendations you might have if you don't support those.
I'm fundamentally against that. Get Washington totally away from our elections. Election law should be made at the state level. And listen, let me say something that all of my Republican opponents in the primary are afraid to say. I'm sure Morgen is afraid to say. Everyone in the state in politics is afraid to say, and I want to say it very clearly. I believe the 2020 election was stolen from Donald J. Trump. And let me give you some solutions at the state level to bring integrity to the elections.
Wow.
First, bring in photo ID. Not just voter ID, photo ID. Now, these lefties, they say that photo ID is somehow racist. Give me a break. There's nothing racist about having to show a photo ID to vote. Listen, if someone's out there on welfare, they have to show a photo ID to get their welfare. If someone's getting unemployment, they have to show their photo ID to get unemployment. There's nothing racist about it. Second, get rid of these machines. Not just the Dominion machines, all the machines. The machines are a solution in search of a problem. Go back to paper ballots. Third, get rid of all this 30 days of voting. It's crazy. Go back to one day. It's called Election Day. Fourth, get rid of vote by mail. Listen, if you're a senior citizen, you're military overseas, you're disabled, you can vote by mail. The other 99% of the population, get in the car, get on your bike, go to the polls and vote.
Okay, Morgen, you have a minute.
Wow, what a cuck.
Talking to real Ohioans, not just throwing out slogans and the talking points that my opponent has to say, but real Ohioans, what they're saying is that they're very concerned about voting rights issues, that we're seeing the lines that it's taking people to vote on Election Day that can be hours in waiting. This doesn't have to be this way, that we have drop boxes that are one per county in places like Franklin County where we have over 2 million people. It doesn't make any sense. This is our right. It should be protected, and it is why I would support both pieces of legislation in the Senate right now to both make sure that we can protect the right to vote, but also end the types of activities that have been promoted by the Republican Party, like the partisan gerrymandering. So let's remind ourselves why we've gotten to this place. It's because one party feels like it has to cheat in order to win and try to deny black people the right to vote in order to get enough votes for themselves. We see through what's happening, and my opponent and his entire party has gotten us to this place to threaten our entire democracy.
That's right.
And let's get back to another thing that he's mentioned.
Yes.
The big lie. Another thing he has to say, as we know, in order to get the support of the former president to try to get through his Republican primary.
Exactly.
But let's focus on what actually happened with the big lie, with the riots that occurred on the Capitol. By claiming that Joe Biden did not actually win the election, they fomented the type of activity that led to the loss of lives of the very law enforcement officials that my opponent claims to care so deeply about. Loss of lives, both that day and to suicide after.
We're at time. Thank you both. So the next question is for both of you, but Morgen will go first. Kevin, a community leader and advocate, asked both candidates, here in Columbus, we experienced one of the worst years in our history for gun violence. What bipartisan collaboration will you do to curb gun violence across the nation while still protecting Second Amendment rights for responsible gun owners?
A huge issue right now, and it's one that is coming up a lot as I travel around the state. I just met a gentleman last week who shared a necklace he was wearing with his daughter who had been lost to gun violence, a picture of her on the necklace. And so we need to be honest about the fact that this is happening, that we're seeing a lot of young people especially who are losing their lives, and what should we do about it? This would be one of my top priorities once elected, that within 90 days we are going to bring together faith leaders, we are going to bring together people from the private sector, public sector, to come together with a plan of how we're going to make sure that we do not lose another young person to gun violence in the state of Ohio, and implement that plan immediately. And that whole idea has nothing to do with anything about threatening gun ownership in this country or in our state. I know several people very well all throughout our state, some of my personal friends, who also are feeling the impacts of a lack of safety and are responsible gun owners. So that is something that we absolutely should be preserving, but also recognize that part of that is implementing common sense legislation that will mandate background checks, ensure that we're keeping guns away from children so that we don't have any incidents, unintended incidents of violence as well. These things are not contradictory. We can come together to address the violence, and we need to do that as soon as possible.
Okay, a minute and a half for Josh.
First, when it comes to our gun rights, no compromise, no trading one right for another. I will never compromise. I will never give in to Democrat or Republican leaders to restrict gun ownership, gun use of any kind. The Second Amendment to our Constitution, which we are blessed to have, shall not be infringed, period. The reason we have a Second Amendment to the Constitution is to combat tyranny from the government. And ladies and gents, there's a lot of tyranny out there right now.
It is only supposed to be for
Please
militias.
God, we'll never have to use those weapons.
National Guard, not for private
protect
citizens.
ourselves from the government.
That's the original
But
intent
thank God
of the
we
Constitution.
do have the right to own them for this purpose. In order to stop gun violence and protect people, we need to empower police. We need to trust police. We need to give police the benefit of the doubt. We need to crush organizations like Black Lives Matter and Antifa.
Wow, what a racist cunt.
Whose silence is deafening.
Wow.
When young black people are getting slaughtered on the south side of Chicago. But they have no problem doing these protests where they break windows. They don't care about black people. They care about liberal policies.
That is just factually inaccurate and racist.
Okay, Josh, this question is for you, and it is from Phil from Canton. You'll have a minute and a half to respond, and Morgan, you'll have a minute for rebuttal. Phil from Canton writes in, due to the way President Biden and his administration mishandled the withdrawal from Afghanistan, do you trust this administration to effectively address the buildup of Russian troops on the Ukraine border?
I do not trust the Biden administration with any foreign policy. If President Biden would have followed President Trump's withdrawal plan, which was the spring, which is not the fighting season for the Taliban, there wouldn't have been lost lives.
That is
The blood
factually inaccurate.
of those Marines and soldiers is on Joe Biden's hands,
That's a
including
lie.
Max Kobiak
That's a lie.
from Berlin Heights, Ohio.
Absolute.
Biden's
utter
decision
trash.
to voluntarily abandon Bagram Air Base, voluntarily, will go down as one of, if not the worst decisions
Trump released 5,000 Taliban members,
by a commander-in-chief,
including the new
in
head
American
of
history.
the Afghan government. Trump released him from prison.
And let me
It
tell you
was
something
Trump's
about
doing.
Russia and Putin. Putin is all about energy dominance in Europe. If you want to tighten that economic noose on Putin, drill for all the natural gas we can in America, in Ohio, power our homes, power our factories, and then, with the leftover, export it to Europe and compete against them. And instead of Ukraine and Germany and France and Italy and these countries depending on Putin for natural gas, imagine if they depended on America. Those are the kind of policies we need coming out of Washington.
Thank you. We'll reset the timer, and Morgan, you'll have 1 minute.
Well, first I want to come back to the prior question because my opponent completely glossed over the loss of young lives in our state. And Josh, I have to know what your answer is to young people dying all over our state because of violence.
Yeah, my answer is stop attacking the police and empower the police and fund the police to protect young people and protect people in this state. You know, Black Lives Matter and Antifa and these radical groups, they're out there attacking the police. Allow cops in Columbus and Cleveland and Cincinnati to do their job and protect people. Black, white, Hispanic, whatever. Allow them to do their jobs. That's the answer, Morgan.
No plan, no vision. He does not care about our communities and our young people. And getting back to the question at hand about preserving life, about making sure that our young people are healthy, let's talk about that. Because we needed to end a war in Afghanistan that was resulting in many lost lives, that had no strategy, had no vision, and had gone on for 20 years. It had to stop. And I also think that we should be exercising appropriate discretion with any future foreign military involvement as well.
All right, the last question that I have is for both candidates, and Morgan, you'll answer first, and you have 1.5 minutes, and then Josh, you'll have 1.5 minutes for response without any other further rebuttal. Which political response to COVID-19 has surprised you the most, and why? The pro-life right, who basically argue my body, my choice when it comes to masks or vaccine mandates, or the pro-abortion left, basically declaring that life is so precious, we are eliminating your choice when it comes to your health?
I think we all need to stay focused on the fact that we have lost almost 1 million people to the coronavirus since the pandemic hit over 2 years ago. 1 million people. And so what I want to focus on, and what I think we all should recognize, is that we now know enough to manage the virus. We know what the tools are, and those are tools that I support. We need to make sure we have as many people vaccinated as possible. We need to make sure that we have tests so that people know when they are sick and they are not infecting others. And we need to make sure that people continue to wear masks to prevent further infection. We need leaders that are focused on that. Not my opponent, who spends his time traveling to New York to talk about vaccines and cheesecake factories, or burning masks to post videos on Twitter. That's not what leadership looks like. That's not going to allow us to preserve life and continue to have the freedom to both be healthy, have our kids educated in schools, and continue to keep our economy moving.
Thank you. We'll reset the timer. Josh, you have 1.5 minutes.
This whole COVID situation, it was never about health or science. From the get-go, it was about power and control. Coronavirus was a bioweapon manufactured by the Chinese Communist Party for one main reason. Donald Trump was the first president in our lifetime to take on and fight and combat the Chinese Communist Party.
That is an absolute lie.
The Chinese Communist Party didn't like that, so they manufactured a bioweapon to export to the United States to try to bring down our economy.
That is propaganda.
That's
it is
it,
a
ladies
lie.
and gents.
It's point blank
and all the
lie.
hysteria created by the media, all the hysteria created by left-wing politicians, they're trying to take your freedom away. When this is all said and done and we look back on it, this will be seen as the most significant transfer of power in American and world history. It's why I'm so strongly against vaccine mandates and mask mandates. It should be up to moms and dads and citizens. And the question was about the pro-abortion movement. I think the pro-abortion movement was completely and continues to be completely hypocritical on this, as they are with so many issues day after day after day.
Time is up. Thank you. Oh, wait. This was for both candidates, and you had started, so there won't be a rebuttal. Your question.
Okay. Next questions. We have 2 more questions. Both are for both candidates. We'll start with Josh for this first question. We got a lot of questions about health care, and Nina, a legal secretary from Marysville, asked both candidates, what ideas would you bring to the Senate for making health care more affordable? It is going up no matter where you work, but very difficult on small businesses and their employees. Would either of you vote in favor of universal health care?
I am fundamentally and strongly against universal health care. I've heard so many stories about people from Canada who have to come into America when they have important surgeries. Especially, I live in the Cleveland area, and you hear time and time again about Canadians coming to the Cleveland Clinic for surgeries because they're going to die if they wait in line for that long
inaccurate.
In Canada. And so that's one of many reasons why I'm against universal health care. One of the things we also have to do within this whole discussion is completely defund Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is a pro-abortion organization. It should not receive one penny of tax money. I was proud as a state legislator to do everything I could to defund Planned Parenthood and stop tax money from going to them. And if any of the tax money is going to go to any organization like that, it should go to pregnancy centers throughout the state of Ohio, like the one that Shart Dunbar runs right here in the Columbus area, that is actually helping pregnant women through their pregnancies. Now listen, we need to allow people to buy insurance across state lines. We need to do everything we can to empower private physician practices so they can compete against these large conglomerate hospital systems. A free market benefits the patient, and a monopoly market, which you're about to hear from Morgen, is bad for patients and bad for families.
It's absolutely
Please don't speak for me.
Inaccurate.
Here's what I would focus on, is the stories that I'm hearing from real Ohioans. Like the workers that I met in Northwest Ohio who had had their deductible changed from $5,000 to $13,000 overnight by their employer. And they come to me saying, Morgen, can you believe it? And my answer is yes, because we are all beholden to a large insurance and big pharma complex that has all the control and sets all the terms. We have had almost 1 million people who lost their health care coverage during the pandemic here in Ohio because it's tied to their employer. The way that we are going to be able to stop that, to ensure universal coverage and control the cost of care, both in hospitals and with pharmaceuticals, is by having a universal health care system. And I would actually wonder if my opponent, part of the reason why he's not so supportive of these changes, it's not because of the lies about what's happening in Canada or not. No, people are not going into debt because of medical expenses in Canada. That's what's happening in Canada. The real reason is that he is funded by the same special interests that want everything to stay exactly the same.
Status
That's
quo.
who's behind
That's
his
exactly
campaign.
Right.
That's who he is protecting,
Yes.
and he does not care about the health of people here in Ohio.
Right.
Thank you both. Okay,
Yes,
our last
Morgen is
question,
absolutely
Morgen
correct.
will answer first. Both of you will have 1.5 minutes. We had multiple question submitters concerned about government corruption. And so for both candidates, do you support anti-corruption legislation such as lowering campaign spending limits, the Fair Representation Act, or prohibiting members from owning stocks?
Yes, get out.
I support all of those
dark
things.
money.
And as I referenced in my introductory
politics,
remarks,
yes.
I believe one of the biggest problems that we face is that we don't have leaders that are truly representing us. They are funded by special interests like my opponent. We have representatives that have information, more insider information that they use to enrich themselves.
Yes.
And the only way that we're going to be able to stop it is, yes, by having comprehensive campaign finance reform, but also recognizing that we have an opportunity to just elect people directly who are making a commitment to be for the people.
Yes.
So that's what I'm offering the people of Ohio,
Yes.
and that is why I'm not taking any corporate PAC money. I am grassroots funded. My opponent, on the other hand, has super PACs like the Club for Growth that has given him over $15 million over the course of his political career. He has taken money from the payday lending industry and parties with them in the Bahamas, and he is not going to be for the people. A lot of these people, especially in the Senate race on the right, are saying that they are going to stand up to power and take on people like big tech and all of this. It's nonsense. They are bought and paid for it as well by the special interests that have prevented Washington from serving the interests of real Ohioans. I am going to be for us 100%, 24/7, every day of the week.
Morgen, did you sell your stocks when you got into the Senate race?
I don't have any individual stocks.
because I did. I got into the Senate race in Q1 of last year, and in Q1 of last year, I sold my stocks. Because I do not believe that United States senators should be able to secretly obtain information in the halls of the United States Senate and then personally put money in their pockets because of it. That is what Nancy Pelosi has done over the past however many years she's been in the U.S. House. She has made millions and millions and millions of dollars off of our backs. She sits with the head of the FDA. He whispers in her ear about some big pharmaceutical drug that's going to get approved. She buys stock, makes money
That's
the
a
next
lie.
day.
There's
She sits
no
with the head of
factual
the
evidence for
Department of
any of that.
Transportation.
He's
He
pushing more
whispers in her ear
propaganda.
about some big transportation project. She buys stock, and that company is going to do it, makes money the next day. Ladies and gents, Republicans are just as guilty as Democrats in stuffing money in their pockets. It's why I'm so strongly against the establishment in both parties. And when I go to Washington, I'm not just going to drain the swamp. I am going to blow up the swamp. I am not going there to be liked. I am not going there to make friends. I am going there to take on the establishment in both parties.
Josh Mandel is the swamp. Josh Mandel is the swamp.
Okay.
He is not going to drain anything.
We're done with our regular questioning portion. We are going to
Way to
move
go,
to
Morgan.
closing statements. We'll do a quick closeout after that, but we are starting with Josh for a 2-minute statement to close us out.
About 80 years ago, in a town called Kelch, Poland, the Nazis walked into the home of my grandfather Joe and his 5 siblings, put them on cattle cars, took them to death camps. At the same time, my grandma Fernanda, she was an Italian Jew, she was being hidden and saved by very courageous Christian families in Italy. And at that very same time, my grandfather Harold from Cleveland, Ohio, who grew up on Kinsman Avenue and went to John Adams High School, he was wearing the uniform of our great country, serving in the United States Army Air Corps. They hammered into me growing up, in this life I owe 2 debts to 2 very powerful forces. Without those forces, I wouldn't be here tonight. My kids, Gideon, Judah, and Rosie, wouldn't be home doing bedtime, bath time right now. One of those forces is the U.S. military. Brave men in places like Iwo Jima, Normandy, Omaha Beach, who paid the ultimate sacrifice so we can be here tonight in freedom and disagree and debate. An amazing thing we can do in this country that doesn't happen in most countries around the world. And in trying to pay back that debt, I did my small part and joined the United States Marine Corps. And that second powerful force that made it possible for me to be here tonight was a network of courageous Christians. Men and women who sacrificed and risked their own lives to save my grandmother. When I get to the United States Senate, I will be a pointy tip of the spear fighter for men and women like me who wore the uniform of the United States Marine Corps, and for men and women of faith throughout this country who want to protect the Judeo-Christian bedrock of this America. I am pro-God,
is just
pro-gun, pro-Trump,
trigger phrase
and I will
that
fight in
the right
Washington
uses
with the
for
Constitution
rich white
in one
straight
hand
men.
and the Bible in the other. Thank you very much.
I think what's become very clear from tonight's discussion, in case it wasn't clear to anyone already, is that Josh Mandel will not be fighting for the people of Ohio. That's not what his Senate run is about. That isn't what his political career has been about.
Exactly, Morgan.
And we need people that understand real Ohioans and real Ohio stories to represent us in Washington. And what's my Ohio story? My Ohio story is a story that even with a father who was unemployed, homeless, that I had a mother and my brother who's here tonight who were able to pull each other together with a strong community and get through it so that I got the chance to live up my potential.
Exactly.
That's Ohio.
That's
this is a fraud.
Ohio.
And I am scared as a woman, as a black person, as a daughter who has a mother who lives off of a monthly pension, of getting this guy anywhere near a seat of power in the United States Senate.
Exactly.
And if I thought that Tim Ryan could beat him, I would not be standing here tonight.
Right.
I would not. I know what it is to hit rock bottom and fight, and it is that fight I will bring to make sure that we have economic freedom
Yes.
and guarantee opportunity for every person living in Ohio. Ohio, no one is coming to save us. We have to fight for this for ourselves, and so please join us in that. MorganHarper.org. Morganize with us. We can get it done, but we have no time to wait. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Ooh, it is freezing outside, but it is hot in here. That was intense. And I just want to thank everyone who came out tonight, everyone who's watching online. Just want to acknowledge again that not all of the candidates in this race agreed to be part of this debate and discussion. So I really acknowledge both of these candidates, everyone here, regardless of personal politics.
Go ahead.
You're going to end, right?
We certainly do appreciate their willingness to be open and candid, and I appreciate the kindness that you basically have shown here tonight. I just wanted to close the evening by saying you've seen a demonstration of two people who have two different worldviews, and this is a good place for us to be able to hear somebody's views according to what they see upon the world. Before we leave tonight, I would be remiss as a preacher without reminding this congregation and everybody who may be online that there's one more worldview that we need to consider, and that's the view that God has of this world. The Bible says that whenever God looked down from heaven in Genesis, that He saw that the wickedness of man was great on the face of the earth, and that every imagination of the thought of his heart was only evil continually. Yet a holy God and a just God desires sinful men and women to live with Him for all of eternity. So His Son Jesus Christ came and died on the cross to offer salvation to all. It doesn't matter the party, doesn't matter what we look like, what we sound like, where we grew up, where we were born. Jesus Christ is the way to heaven. And I'm not going to pass the plate tonight or have a come forward invitation, an altar call, but I do want to encourage you, those of you that may have a question online, you can always contact us. I would stay behind for 3 or 4 more hours to talk to somebody if they have any questions about the Bible. Once again, thank you for coming. Thank you, press, for showing up. Thank you, candidates, for being very open and honest. Let's please give them a hand, and we will be dismissed. Thank you very much.
So, I am not thrilled about the ending of that. I believe that the separation of church and state is a very important, fundamental policy of the United States. Religion and politics should never mix. As a gay man and a Christian, I believe in Jesus Christ. I believe in His grace and His saving power. But I do not believe that it is appropriate to mix policy and doctrine, politically speaking. Josh Mandel did that quite a bit tonight, trying to mix his faith and his policies together. And I am saddened by that. Along with him pushing a lot of right-wing propaganda, outright lies, and misinformation to appeal to the lowest part of Donald Trump's base. That is absolutely appalling. The fact that he says that the 2020 election was stolen and Joe Biden is not the legitimate rightful president of the United States of America is absolutely appalling. Him saying that COVID-19 was manufactured by the Chinese to somehow get at Trump is propaganda, outright lie. I feel as though he is saying the things that he is saying simply to win the Republican primary, to have the endorsement of Donald Trump and the right-wing establishment. And that's very, very sad thing. Morgan Harper did an amazing job. I am very grateful that she has stood up and is running this campaign, this grassroots campaign, not taking PAC money or corporate donations. And I believe her when she says that if she thought that Tim Ryan could win, that she wouldn't be there. I don't believe Tim Ryan is going to be able to win against someone like Josh Mandel, but I believe Morgan Harper can. I would encourage each and every one of you to vote in May in the primary. I would encourage each and every one of you to talk to your friends and see if you can get them to register to vote. Bring someone else to the polls with you to vote. Our democracy is on the line here. Thank you guys for checking out my channel. I appreciate all of you. If you want to donate to the channel, the CashApp QR is in the top left corner. Please do like this video and subscribe to my channel. Check out my Patreon, my Facebook, my Twitter, my Instagram, and I will see you guys